An attack by two drones early Tuesday on the US Embassy in Riyadh caused a small fire, a Saudi Defense Ministry spokesman said on Tuesday, as Iran pressed on with retaliatory strikes across the Gulf. The statement added that there was limited damage to the building. Earlier, witnesses had reported hearing loud explosions in the diplomatic quarter, home to foreign embassies in the Saudi capital. The US Embassy has issued shelter-in-place notifications to its nationals for Jeddah, Riyadh and Dhahran, and limited non-essential travel to any military installations in the region. There were also Iranian missiles reportedly intercepted by both the United Arab Emirates and Qatar early on Tuesday morning. Donald Trump is no longer ruling out sending US troops into Iran, as he said the war could last weeks and possibly longer. His comments are dividing opinion even within his own MAGA camp, reviving memories of the Iraq War and putting the Republican Party and the president in a risky political position as the midterm elections approach. And for more on the potential domestic fallout for Donald Trump, I can welcome Pierre Gervais, Professor of American Civilisation at Paris's Sorbonne Nouvelle University. Good morning, Pierre, and thank you very much for joining us. Could I just ask you, what do you think the immediate and short-term and medium-term effects of launching this war might be for Donald Trump?
Well, short-term, it's certainly not helping his popularity. The war is rejected by most of the population. Medium and long-term, it really depends on how it goes, and there's no way you can predict that. The probabilities are on the side of a war which will be at best inconclusive, at worst long. And so the probability is that it will cost him politically in the long run. But really, nobody can know at this stage because the war is not over.
Now, the Iraq War quickly turned into a quagmire and a liability for Republicans at the 2006 midterms, but at the outset, it was quite popular. What sort of blowback, perhaps in the longer term, might this happen? And of course, this may not be Donald Trump's last war as well.
Well, it's a very different situation. First of all, part of the Trump coalition was really opposed to new wars in the Middle East. There's a large part of the base, of the MAGA base, which is really isolationist. So that plays right away against the war. The second point is that the run-up to the war was very different. Bush made a number of efforts to actually sell the war both to the international community and to its own people. None of that was done by Trump, who basically, with his administration, decided unilaterally to go to war, ignoring both the Constitution and international agreements, the UN, etc. So there's a liability built in from the start. The only upside for Trump is that the opposition, the Democratic opposition, is really weak at this point. It's unable to get its act together, even though the base is ferociously opposed to the war, as it was opposed to Israeli genocidal policy in Gaza and, generally speaking, what has been happening in the Middle East under Trump's administration in the past few years. But basically, the Democrats cannot organize themselves because part of their elected representatives, I'm thinking of John Fetterman, for instance, just back the war. So there is a significant small segment of the Democratic leadership, not the base, but the leadership, which is actually more on the side of the war than a significant part of the Republican base. So the the political situation, is really complicated. And again, the final result at the polls, assuming there will be polls, I mean, Trump has said repeatedly that he would want to cancel the elections this fall. Assuming there will be polls, the net result, it will probably be an even worse result for the Republican, but we will have to see that this summer, basically.
Now, Donald Trump has historically low approval ratings, but he's still supported by 38% of the electorate, which is a figure that has held firm for years throughout his time in opposition and as president. Is there a possibility that his base, despite much of them being isolationist, will choose to overlook this breach of the no new wars promise?
Well, it overlooked every single breach up to now, so it may overlook this one as well. That base, the 28% you're mentioning, are really a cult in some ways. I mean, certainly it's an authoritarian party. Hitler didn't have more than 30%, 33% of the population with him. That's enough. That may be enough if you're organized for that to hold on to power, even though the rest of the population doesn't want to. So these are the diehards. Again, part of them, but it's hard to gauge how many, think that war is really a step too far. But on the other hand, if that will translate on the ground in terms of polls or rejection of Trump, that's hard to say. The only thing is, at this point, the MAGA base is really not organized the way you would have expected an authoritarian party to organize. You don't have, armed militias roaming in the street and beating up Democrats. So you're still within a relatively normal political situation. So yes, the MAGA base may crack up on that.
Now, if it isn't the war that determines the midterm elections, and generally foreign policy is not a large determining factor for US voters, if it's not the war, what might be the issues that could actually bring the Republicans down?
Okay, again, it's assuming the polls will take place normally, which is not a given at this point. There have been repeated declarations from Trump downwards to Steve Bannon about surrounding the polls, sending ICE to basically prevent polls from functioning in democratic areas, taking voting machines under the guise of fraud and canceling the vote in some places. So you don't really know, we don't really know at this point how the elections will take place in the fall. But assuming for the moment that the election takes place relatively normally for the United States, and the United States has never been a perfect democracy, the vote is rigged in places and incomplete in others. But assuming it's business as usual, the main issue, of course, as always in the United States, is the economy. At this point, 50% of the population consider themselves working class. I mean, you have now a majority of people who consider that they don't belong to the middle class anymore, which is a big shift from the 60s and 70s. And this is because they have lost ground considerably on a number of fronts: education, healthcare, and they are living paycheck to paycheck. Prices have gone up again, and they are unable to live the American dream, if you wish. This is the core issue for a lot of people, and this is what Trump promised to fix, actually. That was basically why he was elected, and he has not done, of course, anything towards helping the mass of the population with that. So it's really that much more than foreign affairs, which it's not unimportant. Biden lost partly because of his support for Israeli genocidal policies. He lost a considerable amount of people in places like Michigan, and possibly not Biden, I'm sorry, but Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris lost because of that, or partly because of that. And there is a segment of the population which is engaged in foreign affairs, but it's relatively small. And at this point, the polls indicate that the Republicans are underwater way beyond anything which would be connected to foreign affairs anyway. And that's because of the economy.
Now, if the Republicans did lose control of Congress, that would leave Donald Trump, just like George W. Bush 20 years ago, in the position of being a lame duck president for the past 2 years of his, for the last 2 years of his term. Now, generally a lame duck president means that they're quite hampered by the legislature. Would that actually be the same thing with Donald Trump, who generally tends to more or less ignore any type of impediments?
Yes, well, it's the same question for the polls as for control of what one would say the constitutional process. At this point, Congress has been deprived of the power of the purse. Trump spends money as if nothing was voted by Congress. Congress has been mostly deprived of its oversight powers. Trump ignores them. The Constitution is daily trampled in some ways by the ICE practices of raiding people with no judicial warrants. This is completely against the Bill of Rights. So even if, assuming that Trump allows the polls to take place, his reaction to a hostile Congress is unpredictable at this point. I do not know what will happen if he will actually lay low and wait for the end of his mandate, which is very unlikely, or simply try to carry on as if nothing was happening and aggravating that way the constitutional crisis, which is already there. And the Supreme Court does no help. Anyway, the judges don't have an army, as it's always recalled. If Trump ignores orders from Congress the way he has ignored orders from the judiciary in the past, it's not at all sure that the Democrats will have the wherewithal to actually oppose it as it should be. And it's really not easy at this point to determine what will happen. Certainly Trump in his head and some of his advisors and people surrounding him are hoping to essentially do away with the rule of law and democracy in the US. But on the other hand, they don't seem to be equipped to do that. And that's, I guess, the American people can be thankful for the related incompetence of their own authoritarians.
Thank you very much for that, Pierre Gervais, Professor of American Civilization at Sorbonne Nouvelle University here in Paris.